He sent the invitation on a Tuesday, which was the kind of detail that said everything about the man he had become. Not a Friday, when people were loose with their emotions and might read something sentimental into it. Not a Monday, when the gesture might be dismissed as impulsive. A Tuesday, deliberate, calculated. The way a man signs a document he has already decided to use against you. Laurence Whitfield had the assistant hand-deliver it to her office on the 14th floor of the Meridian Tower in downtown Atlanta. The envelope was cream-colored and heavy, the kind of paper that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. Her name was written across the front in calligraphy. Josephine Carter. Every letter formed with the kind of careful pressure that made it clear someone had been paid to make it look like it mattered. Josephine was on a call with her team in Singapore when her assistant knocked and set the envelope on the edge of her desk. She held up one finger, finished her sentence about the Q3 server migration timeline, and then picked up the envelope the way you pick up something you already know you don't want. She already knew what it was before she opened it. She could feel it in the weight of the cardstock, in the way her assistant had set it down and left the room a little too quickly, the way people leave rooms when they don't want to be nearby when something goes wrong. The invitation was printed in gold ink on ivory paper. Laurence Whitfield and Melissa Ann Pryor request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony. There was a venue, the Holloway Estate in Buckhead. A date, the second Saturday in September. A dress code, black tie. And at the bottom, written by hand in blue pen, a note that was not calligraphy and was not careful. I thought you should see what you walked away from. Lil Josephine read the note twice. Then she set the invitation face down on her desk, took off her glasses, and looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline for a long time. She did not cry. She had not cried in front of anything related to Laurence Whitfield in 4 years, and she was not about to start now, alone in her office with Singapore still open on her laptop. What she felt was something quieter than anger and older than grief. It was the particular exhaustion of recognizing a person completely. She picked the invitation back up, turned it over, and looked at the date again. Then she opened her calendar. She was free that Saturday. People who had not known Josephine Carter when she was 26 would have found it difficult to imagine her then. She had grown up in Decatur, Georgia, in a house where the water heater broke every other winter, and her mother worked double shifts at the hospital, not as a doctor, not as a nurse, but as the woman who cleaned the rooms between patients and knew every wing of that building the way you know a place you can't afford to leave. Josephine had gone to Georgia State on a partial scholarship. She had eaten a lot of peanut butter. She had eaten a lot of peanut butter. She had studied computer science in a program where she was, for most of her 4 years, the only black woman in the room. She met Laurence in her second year of graduate school. He was a year ahead of her, already charming, already working on the pitch deck that would eventually become what people called his visionary early career move, and what Josephine, who had helped him build it, called a Tuesday night in the library, that turned into a Tuesday night that turned into 6 months of her expertise applied to his ambition. They married when she was 29. He was 31 and already talking about the kind of success that required a specific kind of partner. Someone who understood the work, who could speak to investors, who could sit across from a board and not look like she was sitting across from a board. Josephine understood the work because she had done most of it. She had spent 3 years building the infrastructure of what became Whitfield Analytics, from a product that barely functioned into a platform that 3 Fortune 500 companies paid real money to use. She had written the technical documentation. She had managed the engineering team. She had been the one on the phone at 2 in the morning when the servers went down the night before a major demo, talking a junior developer through a fix while Laurence slept in the next room. She had also, twice, kept him out of serious legal trouble. The first time was a contract dispute with an early vendor that Laurence had handled poorly, and that was heading toward litigation until Josephine read the original agreement carefully and found the clause that made the case go away. The second time was quieter and more significant, involving a regulatory filing that contained an error that could have drawn the kind of attention from the SEC that ends companies. Josephine found it at 11:45 on a Friday night, fixed it, and filed the correction before midnight. She never told him about the second one. She told herself it was because she didn't want him to panic. The truth was closer to something she didn't have a word for then. The instinct of a woman who has learned that the person she loves is the kind of person who, if told he almost fell, would spend the next month being angry at the ground. They divorced when she was 35. He had been involved with Melissa for 7 months before Josephine found out. And when she found out, she did not make a scene. She called her attorney, moved her files to a secure drive, and began the process with the same methodical attention she gave to everything that mattered, the settlement. The settlement was fair. Josephine did not ask for more than was hers, which was considerable, because she had continued her own consulting work throughout the marriage, and had saved carefully, and had made 2 early investments in tech startups that had returned very well. She did not need his money, she had her own. In the 4 years since the divorce, she had built Areli Technologies, named for her middle name, the one her grandmother had given her. From a boutique AI consulting firm into a company with 47 employees, 2 patents pending, and a client list that included a major hospital network, a regional bank, and a federal agency she was not permitted to name in public materials. She had been on the cover of Atlanta Business Chronicle twice. She had been invited to speak at MIT. She had not thought about Laurence Whitfield very much at all, which was the healthiest thing she had done in years. Until a cream-colored envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Her best friend, a woman named Odessa Forrest, who had known Josephine since they were both 19 and working the same shift at a midtown coffee shop, came over that evening and read the invitation twice, and then read it a third time, which was the kind of thing Odessa did when she was buying herself time before saying something she knew the other person needed to hear. "He wrote that by hand," Odessa said finally. "I know. He sat down and he picked up a pen and he wrote that. I know. So he could have not done that. The invitation alone would have been enough of a statement. But he added the note. He needed you to know it was on purpose." Josephine poured them both more wine. "Yes." Odessa set the invitation down on the kitchen table. "Are you going to go?" There was a pause that lasted several seconds, which between them meant Josephine had already made up her mind and was deciding how to explain it. "I think I am," Josephine said. Odessa did not say don't, and she did not say why, because she had known Josephine for 17 years, and she understood, in the way that you understand a person you have watched become themselves, that this was not about Laurence. It had not been about Laurence for a long time. "What are you going to wear?" Odessa asked. Josephine almost smiled. "Something appropriate." The Holloway estate sat on 6 acres in Buckhead with a long driveway lined with magnolia trees and a main house that had been used for weddings and fundraising galas for 40 years. It was the kind of place that made certain men feel like the culmination of something. The kind of place that said, "Look how far I've come." Josephine arrived 11 minutes after the doors opened. She came in a car, not a car service, not a rideshare, but a black Escalade, driven by a man named Jerome, who had worked for her for 2 years, and who knew, without being told, to park where he could see the front entrance, and to stay close to his phone. With her were 2 other people, not friends, not dates, colleagues, 2 members of her operations team who also happened to have backgrounds in corporate security. Because Areli Technologies had recently expanded into enterprise security consulting, which meant Josephine occasionally moved through the world with people who were very good at reading rooms. They were both dressed appropriately for a black tie event. Josephine wore a dress the color of deep water, a dark navy that read as black in most lighting, but caught the chandelier light differently, the way intentional things do. She wore her hair up. She wore one piece of jewelry, a ring on her right hand, a wide band of yellow gold that had belonged to her grandmother. She did not look like a woman who had been invited to be humiliated. She looked like what she was. The first person who recognized her was not someone she knew. It was a woman standing near the bar in a pale gold dress who worked, Josephine would later learn, in venture capital, and who touched her companion's arm and said, quietly, "Is that Josephine Carter? From Orally Technologies?" The companion looked. "I think so. What is she doing here?" "I have no idea," the woman in the gold dress said, "but I want to find out." Laurence saw her from across the room at the moment that was worst for him, which was the moment he was laughing. He had been standing with three men from his college years, men who had been following his career with the particular enthusiasm of people who have attached their sense of possibility to someone else's trajectory. He was holding a glass of champagne, and he was in the middle of a story. The kind of story he told, at events like this, about a negotiation, about leverage, about coming out ahead. And his face was arranged in the expression of a man who is entirely at ease in his own narrative. And then he saw her. The story died somewhere in his throat. His hand tightened on the champagne flute. One of the men noticed the change in his expression and turned to follow his gaze, and then did not say anything, because there was nothing obvious to say. What Laurence felt in that moment was not what he had expected to feel. He had imagined, in the weeks since he sent the invitation, that she would arrive quietly, maybe with a friend, and that she would stand somewhere in the room and watch him marry someone else, and that this would settle something in him that had not been settled. He had not been precise with himself about what, exactly, needed settling. He rarely was. He had not imagined her arriving like this, with people flanking her, with a composure that made the room feel like it was arranged around her rather than the other way. He had not imagined that the woman in the gold dress near the bar would walk over to greet her, or that Josephine would know her name without being reminded, or that they would begin a conversation that looked, from across the room, like two people who had things to say to each other. He excused himself from the men and put his champagne glass on a passing tray and told himself it was fine. He had invited her. He had control of this. Melissa had been told, weeks ago, that Laurence had sent an invitation to his ex-wife. She had asked why, and his answer had been the version of the truth that was easiest to receive. He wanted to show her that he had moved on, that there were no loose ends, that everything from before was behind him. Melissa had accepted this because she was 29 and in love, and because she had also been told, in various ways, and by various people, that Josephine Carter had not taken the divorce well, that she had walked away with bitterness she'd tried to disguise as composure, that her company was built partly on resentment. None of this was accurate, but Melissa had no way of knowing that because all of her information about Josephine had come from Laurence. She was standing with her bridesmaids in the east wing of the estate when her maid of honor, a woman named Tanya who had a talent for observing rooms, came in and said, carefully, "Josephine Carter is here." Melissa straightened. "I know Laurence invited her. I know he did," Tanya said. "But," she stopped. She tried again. "She didn't come alone, and some of the investors here are talking to her. Talking to her about what?" Tanya chose her next words with care. "About Orally Technologies, about their new security and AI division, about the contract she just closed with the federal government." She paused. "I think a few of them didn't know the full picture of what she'd been doing since the divorce." Melissa looked at Tanya for a long moment. Something in her chest shifted, quietly, the way things shift before you understand what they mean. "What full picture?" she said. The ceremony began on time. Josephine sat in the fourth row on the left side, which was neither prominent nor invisible, which was exactly the kind of choice that she made by habit, and that Laurence spent the entire ceremony trying not to look at. The officiant spoke about commitment and partnership, and the courage it takes to love someone fully. The words were not unusual for a wedding ceremony. What was unusual was the way they landed in the specific room where they were spoken, in the ears of the specific people assembled there, against the specific history of the man standing at the altar. Josephine watched the ceremony. She did not look away. She was not there to make a scene, and she was not there to cause pain, and she was not there to announce anything. She was there because he had invited her, and because she had, after 4 years of building something real, stopped being afraid of his opinion of her, and walking into a room he thought would diminish her was the clearest way she knew to confirm that. She was also there because 3 of the investors in that room were people she had been trying to get introductions to for several months, and those introductions had now happened naturally, over cocktails, before the ceremony even began. There is a kind of woman who can hold two things at once, the personal and the professional, the wound and the momentum, and who has learned, through years of operating in rooms that did not expect her, to let both be true without apology. Josephine was that kind of woman. It was during the reception that things became clear to Laurence in a way he had not arranged and could not stop. He was at the head table with Melissa, and the evening was proceeding the way he had planned, and then Mitchell Greaves, a man who ran a private equity firm and whose interest Laurence had been cultivating for 2 years, approached the table. Laurence stood to shake his hand. He began the sentence he had been preparing. Mitchell spoke first. "Extraordinary woman, your ex-wife," he said. Not unkindly. Not with any visible agenda. The way a man says something true. Laurence kept his expression even. "Josephine is. I had no idea she was the one who built out the technical infrastructure at Whitfield Analytics," Mitchell said. "I'd heard the company name, of course, but I had always assumed." He stopped, reconsidered his phrasing. "We've been looking at O'Reilly Technologies for a partnership. The federal contract they just closed is remarkable. She's built something significant." Laurence said something that was not quite a full sentence. "I'd love an introduction through you, actually," Mitchell said. "If you're on good terms." The table was quiet in the way that tables get quiet when everyone has heard something but is pretending not to have. Melissa, who had been listening, set her fork down. Mitchell moved on. Laurence sat back down. He picked up his wine glass and put it back down without drinking. Across the room, he could see Josephine at a table near the windows, talking to two people he also recognized. A woman who ran a technology accelerator and a man who sat on the board of a hospital network. They were leaning toward her the way people lean toward someone when they don't want to miss what's being said. He had invited her here to watch him stand at the top of something. What he had not understood, until this moment with Mitchell Greaves' words still sitting in the air above the head table, was that she was not watching him at all. She was working. She was doing what she had always done. Showing up, assessing the room, finding the connections that mattered, doing the work quietly and completely, while someone nearby believed themselves to be the center of it. For the first time since the invitation, something in Laurence felt not triumphant but unsteady. Like a man who has set up a photograph of himself and then turned around and discovered the backdrop has changed. Tanya found Melissa in the bathroom of the East Wing at 9:45, which was the kind of place where honest conversations happen at events like this. Melissa was standing at the sink, not washing her hands, just standing with the water running. "Are you okay?" Tanya asked. "He told me she didn't handle the divorce well," Melissa said. "He told me she was bitter. He told me she'd tried to take more than she was owed." Tanya was quiet. "I just spent 20 minutes talking to a woman from venture capital who told me Josephine Carter is one of the most respected technology executives in Atlanta," Melissa said. "She said O'Reilly Technologies just landed a government contract worth." She stopped. She pressed her fingers against her temples. "He told me she walked away from him. That's what he said. Like it was her loss. Like she regretted it." "Maybe she did walk away," Tanya said carefully. "That doesn't mean." "He wrote her a note," Melissa said. "In the invitation. I saw it. I asked about it. He told me it was just being polite." She turned off the water. "It said, 'I thought you should see what you walked away from.'" She said the words evenly, like she was reading a document. "He invited her here to make her feel small. That's why she's here. And she came, and she's not." She stopped again. "She doesn't look small, Tanya." Tanya did not say anything, because there was nothing helpful to say. Josephine left at 10:15. She had stayed longer than she planned, Because the conversation with the woman from the technology accelerator had gone well, and because the salmon at the Holloway estate was, in fact, as good as it had always been. She said goodbye to the people she had connected with, and left her card with two of them, and made a note in her phone about the third. She did not seek out Laurence. She did not seek out Melissa. She did not make a speech or a gesture or a moment of any kind. She walked out through the front doors and down the steps, and Jerome was there with the Escalade, exactly where she'd told him to be, exactly when she'd told him to be there. In the car, on the way back to her building, she looked out the window at the city. Atlanta in September was still warm, the kind of evening where the light hangs longer than it is. Her phone had 3 new messages. 2 were from people she had met tonight. One was from Odessa, which said only, "Well," she typed back, "the salmon was good." A moment later, and Josephine looked at the message. She thought about what to say that was true and complete, and not more than Nessa tonight. "What?" Odessa sent back. Josephine looked out the window again. The skyline passed. A radio tower blinked red in the dark, steady and patient, doing its work without being told. That I stopped needing his approval a long time before I stopped acting like I did, she wrote. She put the phone down. She put the phone down. Outside, the city kept moving. Somewhere behind her, the lights of the Holloway estate were still on, and the band was still playing, and Laurence Whitfield was still at his own wedding, trying to understand how a room he had built had stopped belonging to him the moment she walked into it. Jerome took the exit toward the Meridian Tower. Josephine was already thinking about tomorrow. The Singapore call was early. There was a follow-up email to send to Mitchell Greaves's office, not from her, that would be too direct, but from her director of partnerships, with her name CC'd, professional and easy. She had work to do. She had always had work to do. That had never been the problem. Odessa came over the next morning with coffee and a look on her face that meant she had been thinking since the text messages and had not stopped. They sat on the balcony of Josephine's apartment on the 22nd floor. Below them, the city was doing what it always did on Sunday mornings. Unhurried, unfinished, still becoming. Do you think he understands it yet? Odessa asked. What he built and who actually built it? Josephine held her coffee in both hands. The mug was old and plain and had a small chip on the handle that she had never bothered to replace. He might be starting to, she said. Mitchell Greaves said something to him last night. I could see it from across the room. What did you feel? Watching that? She thought about the question seriously, the way Odessa deserved. Not satisfaction, she said finally. Not the way I thought I would. She looked at the skyline. Something more like confirmation that it was real, that I actually did what I think I did. She paused. For a long time after the divorce, I kept second-guessing myself, wondering if I'd imagined how much I had contributed, wondering if I was just telling myself a story. She shook her head slightly. Last night felt like external verification from people who had no reason to be kind. Odessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And what about the note? I thought you should see what you walked away from." Josephine almost smiled. It was the particular almost smile of a woman who has lived past the thing that was supposed to wound her. He thought I was coming to see him, she said, to see his life, his choice, his arrival at something. She lifted her coffee. But I went to see myself, to see if I could walk into a room he'd designed to diminish me and not feel diminished. She paused. I couldn't have done that 3 years ago, maybe not 2 years ago. She looked at Odessa. I can do it now. Odessa reached over and put her hand over Josephine's, briefly, the way people do when words would make something smaller. They sat for a while in the morning quiet. Below them the city turned, slow and enormous, full of people in rooms trying to understand the distance between who they were and who they had been, and what, if anything, they had built in the space between. Josephine's phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Her director of partnerships. Something about the Mitchell Greaves follow-up. She set her coffee down and picked up the phone. She had work to do. She had always had work to do. And the work, as it turned out, had been enough. The work had been more than enough. The work had been all along, the truest thing about her. And no invitation, no matter how heavy the cardstock, no matter how deliberate the day of the week, could change what a woman becomes when she decides to build something real and does not stop.